teaching at the seminary this past semester during COVID-19, I had a new group of students, and it was uncomfortable to teach with that mask on for 2 hours, a 2-hour class every Friday. But we were in person, and I could use the writing board, the dry eraser board rather, and we could interact. Of course, a student would ask a question, and I have to look around and say, who said that? Because their mouths were covered with the mask, I couldn't see who said anything. I just heard a voice in one side of the classroom as they were all spread out, socially distanced with their masks on. I didn't know where the sound came from until they had to raise their hand to let me know who was actually speaking because of the mask. And then, of course, a small COVID outbreak occurred, and we had to move to online. And I don't know what it's like on the receiving end, but I know what it's like on the teaching end, and it's terrible. Teaching through a computer, especially homiletics. But it was funny, at the end of the semester, one of the students said to me, as we were reflecting on this past semester course, that they had never seen my face. The entire semester, they've only seen my eyes and my very expansive forehead. And they were grateful to act. There was something impersonal about that whole experience, even though we were in person, by covering half of our faces. And I assured them, well, finally, you can now see my better half. And so we finished out the semester online by video. It wasn't easy, but there was something interesting that in spite of that great sacrifice and being distanced as we were teaching online, we could see their whole face. And it made each other more personable. We kind of knew the other somehow better because we could see their face. It's funny what masks can do. I wonder its impact on children developing in their youngest of ages and stages of life where they are only used to seeing half of people's faces. Will that impact their ability to associate and socialize with people and personalize? Well, what impact will that have? We won't know maybe for many years. But being able to see their face makes it personal, even though we were so distant because we were online and now no longer teaching in person. In the scriptures today, we hear from John's gospel that in the birth of Christ, we behold the face of God. For millennia, the Jewish people could not see him. Moses alone talked to him face to face in the tent of meeting, but God could not be seen. And when he was experienced by thunder and earthquake and a pillar of fire and a pillar of cloud, it was horrifying for the people, scary. And then all of a sudden, this scary, distant God whom they had not seen reveals himself in the face of a child born into poverty, the most vulnerable stage of the human condition outside the womb. And they beheld his face, the Magi and the shepherds, and of course, Mary and Joseph first. They could see the face of God. And yet, with the birth of Christ, oftentimes as Christians, we kind of wax perfect and idealize Christmas Day. And we don't think about the Christmases that happen afterwards. But if you think about it, just because Christ was born, if you step back and look around, the Romans still occupied the Holy Land. They had conquered the Israelites, the Jewish peoples. They were paying extraordinary taxes, not being represented, and that's personal for us as Americans. The world, in fact, at the moment of Christ's birth and revelation to the Magi, hadn't actually changed, practically speaking. And the King of Kings and Lord of Lords is placed in a feeding trough of wood for animals, born in a filthy, very unsterile and smelly barn. There's a poverty there. There's a sense of suffering there in that cold night with his gentle, soft infant skin against the harsh hay and that hard wood. It would maybe foreshadow the wood of the cross. His first breaths were on the wood of the creche. His last breath was on the wood of the cross. There was a poverty even in the birth. There was an absence. There was a darkness around them. The world did not yet know and had not changed, and there was still ongoing injustice and suffering. But they could see the face of God. And in the midst of great suffering and challenges and injustice and hardship, because they could see the face of God, everything was somehow different. It was the same, but but it was different. They could see the face of God. The Magi, the scriptures tell us, returned by another way, symbolizing their conversion. They came one way, they left another, both literally, figuratively, and spiritually. I think my class in some ways changed with these students because we could see each other face to face, even if it was virtually. We could see the contours of their face, and they were more personal, more tangible. They were more real in some unconscious way, as I was for them. And even though there was a distance and a sacrifice and a suffering and challenges for them and me, teaching in that way and learning in that way, it was different because we could see each other. The gospel today speaks of light in the midst of darkness. 2020 hasn't ended, and it continues to not disappoint with misery, even with today and the circumstances happening in Nashville. And yet, in the midst of the darkness and the foreshadowing of more deaths from COVID in the months ahead as the vaccine rolls out, we know that eventually there will be light and hope. There will be a practical experience of life as normal again, sometime, hopefully in the summer, if not the fall. What gets us through the next months, what helps us to leave 2020 behind and hope for a future is that we can celebrate seeing the face of God in Christ. It's a light that dispels the darkness. John tells us that the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. This dwelling symbolizes, or literally translated means that God pitched his tent among us. In other words, I'm here now and I'm not going to leave. But tents feel temporal. They kind of are temporal. But there's nothing temporal about God becoming man so that man can become like God. Nothing could be more permanent than God assuming our human, broken, sinful condition and redeeming us with hope. The Word became flesh, and we saw his glory, the glory as of the Father's only Son, full of grace and truth, in the face of a vulnerable infant child, born into poverty, with the wood of the creche embracing his back because of the wood of the cross that would embrace it at the end. In the midst of darkness and injustice and suffering and hardship that continued around Jesus even at his birth, everything changed because they could see his face. Just like that spectacular Christmas star, if we call it that, last Monday during the winter solstice when Jupiter and Saturn came close together, just as it occurred in 1531 on the longest day of the year, the winter solstice, December 12th, when Our Lady of Guadalupe appeared on that tilma and spoke to Juan Diego and healed and spoke to his uncle. There's light in the midst of the longest day of darkness, hope in the midst of great suffering and tragedy for the Aztec peoples and for our world today because of COVID-19 and so many other circumstances. There's a light there. Mary comes. She brings Jesus, and everything changes. For the Aztecs in 1531, after decades of the Spaniards trying to convert them with no success, and with them suffering horribly from smallpox and grave injustices by the conquistadores, the Bishop of Mexico, the protector of the natives, as he was called, could not accomplish what he had been sent there to do. And what he failed in doing, Mary did just through that tilma. Over 9 million Native Americans were converted in the next several years, more than the Catholics that fell away in Europe at that same time because of the Protestant Reformation. One person cannot replace another, but it speaks to God's power and presence when we see his face. For the Aztecs, they saw the face of Mary, a skin color like their own, dressed as they do. She was royalty. Her tilma spoke volumes by the signs and symbols on it to the natives, so much so that upon seeing it, they all wanted to be baptized. They saw her face, and it changed Mexico and North America forever. Today, in the midst of great suffering of 2020, we long to see the face of Christ here and now, fully revealed. The world around us hasn't changed yet. COVID hasn't gone away, and Things are still crazy in many ways. But because we can see his face, we know everything is changing. It will change. We cling to that light and that hope, even in the darkness around us. No one has ever seen God, but we have now, thanks to Jesus. He's the only Son of God, who is at the Father's side. God the Father who has revealed him, so that seeing his face, even though there's still a distance and a darkness among us, he's more personal than ever, and we can have hope. Merry Christmas.